Okay, it is 2 p.m. In Hamburg at least. I want to welcome everybody who is online right now and those who are trickling in to this small webinar of Agile International about agile and robustly funded organization. That is part of our NGO of the Future series. So with the conviction that all our organizations need to find new ways to survive and thrive, really, to meet the challenges of the century that we are in the remaining little time we have left until the SDGs. But first things first, I want to welcome you once again all at this. I'm Chris from Hamburg. My colleagues around the world, well, some of them will be joining us today. And I can see that we are close to the maximum list here of attendees today. The couple of housekeeping things. This webinar will be recorded, so you don't need to keep frantic notes. The recording will be made available to you within a day or so by my colleagues on our YouTube channel and our website. And of course, you can ask any questions, just use the Q&A for that. Good. We have around about 45 minutes together. I'm hoping to be through the material within 20 minutes or so, leaving enough space for us to have a conversation. At that point, your microphones will also automatically be switched on. So feel free to either speak or type the answers, the questions you may have as I proceed to the next few slides here into the Q&A down there. Excellent. Right, for introductions first. My name is Chris. I am the Managing Director at Agile International. I'm not joined today by my colleague Caroline. Unfortunately, she was called away on another client project on an agile transformation. So I'm afraid you will have to make do with me today. My colleagues around the world are literally based around the world. Amsterdam works on a completely digital structure these days since 2018. And as you may know already, our mission is to help build better NGOs and make them be better funded. The two mission statements are, of course, overlapping. But I don't want to talk too much about us, but I want to talk about what we are discussing here today. So we'll have a huge challenge in this day and age. We have the NGOs that we really need to meet this challenging time. The SDGs are due in less than barely 9.5 years time. The UNGA is happening as we speak today. It's all about climate finance today. The disruption is ripe, and many organizations see their mission as being, running from one disruption to the next, rather than actually being able to work towards their mission. I'm hoping today to give you some inspiration about the basic keys of how we helped some of our partner NGOs transform to become a better working NGO, as you see there on this road sign, to become more agile, to create the impact that we really need, and to be funded better. And the two are sometimes a result of each other in order so that we create the NGOs that we need to survive this decade and to advance the SDGs in the remaining time. Now, we're going to use some client examples, some of our partners who have given us permission to do that, but principally we'll have to anonymize as well some of the experience and the case studies as well, because we will never share any client data. That is absolutely pivotal. We will not do that. So in some cases, I'm going to have to refer to an anonymous client. I hope you understand. Right, let's break into this. Now, this looks a little bit much, frankly, and it is, and that's the purpose, because that's sometimes how the world feels right now. If you start on the left here with this wriggly throat sign, disruption is the new normal. We've had COVID-19, and for many areas of the world, for most areas of the world, in fact, it still feels like it's ongoing. Are we going to have the next COVID-23? Our digitalization has taken a massive leap forward. We have donors who changed drastically as response to and now coming out of COVID. And the workforce and the generational change at the donors is demanding a completely new way how we want to engage with our staff, And most frighteningly, of course, is the fact that the things we don't know are a lot bigger than the things we do know. So what other disruption is there around the world? It just seems that the stability of the 90s is long, long gone. Now, this disruption has exposed many weaknesses in many of our partner organizations. And they've asked themselves important questions, such as, are we able actually to keep working efficiently and effectively? Can we actually scale our impact? Can we reach a sufficient size to deliver enough of it? How do we actually ever get the right funding, not just enough funding? There never seems to be enough unrestricted money. And are we just creating one bottleneck after the next? Part of the answer that we found over 2020, 2019 was definitely in something we've been working on since 2011 in making organizations far more agile and make their funding far more robust to impact. And we're going to look a little bit into that today. Good. In terms of, I want to dive straight in terms of how we do this, and I'm going to use a client that we've been working with back in 2019 and over 2020. It's a European Union-based NGO. They have a development and advocacy mandate, and overall there was this feeling at the office there that there was just never enough funding overall, but particularly not enough unrestricted funding. That might sound familiar to some of the organizations you work in. There was also a very siloed, static management structure to meet that has been principally, hang on, let me just zoom it up for you. There we are. They had about 80% of them had institutional donors, and about 16% was unrestricted funding only, and then a little bit of something in between. But 80% of it came from these large institutional donors, which, as you know, only give us a very small amount of unrestricted free money. They've done something interesting though. A similar organization there has actually taken some action, and I'm detailing that here on the right. So we went through a process of first analyzing and then asking ourselves sort of 3 questions. And the questions were, what do we need? What can we get? And how do we get it? It sounds very, very simple, and it basically is. And let me just sort of let you share some light of how we've done this. On the what do we need, we have basically led them through a couple of workshops, 4 or 5 days, didn't take so long to be honest, and just done a so-called zero-based analysis of funding type and amount needed for the strategy. So we've taken the strategy, which was in fairly good shape actually, and painted the word white and said, look, if we are completely kicking this off, how would we fund our mission here? What type of funding do we really need? What amount can we possibly handle? What reach and scale do we need to develop internally to advance our mission successfully? And what overheads as a result of that do we need to keep? And we basically came out after about 4 months of analysis and a few workshops with a number saying this is how much money we need from each type of funding. And then we ask ourselves, how can we get it? So we've spent about 6 weeks only on funding the projection where and when to obtain this, and the investment it would take to do so. Again, not a massive exercise. Took 6 weeks. There was a big summer break in the middle, so maybe even less. The point is, we've been very clear that we only need a certain amount of funding, so let's not develop capacity to diversify our donors at will, but do it in a very structured, very targeted approach. And then the answer was almost coming out of it by itself, and but in 6 months we made the structural changes necessary with this organization and committed the investments necessary to implement the structure and the tools and the capacity to obtain that funding. And I'm very pleased to report that in this particular organization, 75% of the new funding mix now changed after 18 months. And their scaling, i.e. their growth, is on track despite the massive COVID instructions. So, asking yourself these sort of 3 questions certainly goes to show to me that we don't have to take what we are given. We can certainly change it, but we have to go about it in a structured, calm manner. And this is what it looks now. So they have some unrestricted funding, they have then income earned, a completely new income generation. They have some still the institutional donors, but as you can see, it's much reduced than some others. And I really like the quote here by a colleague of ours, saying basically they have shock-proofed their ability to generate income. And one tool that I'd like to sort of maybe give you today is to say, if you list out the type of income, you don't need consultants for that. Just use a very unscientific smiley system and say, hey, looking at the flexibility we need, the surplus over cost we need, maybe the cost of acquisition is a factor. You can use any other categories that are important to your organization. And then you assign a smiley, a neutral, or a frowning emoji to it, or sort of smiley to it. Clearly, with, for example, to go through an unrestricted funding through membership scheme, you're totally flexible in how you use it. But it takes quite a lot to acquire and to repeat, and the management costs are somewhat okay. Whereas an institutional donor, you have zero flexibility how to use it, and the cost of acquisition are not great, but they're not terrible either. Those smileys will be different from organization to organization, so please just don't copy them. You might be similar depending on where you work, what you do. But again, this doesn't actually need an expensive consultant, not that we're massively expensive anyway, but it doesn't actually need someone external. You can do this. And if you need a sort of template for that, I'll happily send you one if you reach out. That's absolutely no problem. Good. So hopefully that gives you an idea of where to start. And if it doesn't, I've got a bit of a sort of start with yourself quick test to gather the support of your colleagues, because sometimes, as we know, we might know that we will do something, but it's hard to kick things off that are really serious, really important, but somehow never seem urgent. So I've got 3 questions here. First question being the amount, are all the key activities you need over time sufficiently funded? And if the answer to that is no, then of course you don't have the right funding, you immediately do something. If the answer to that is yes, for now, for the next 5 years or so, we do have all key activities and investments we need to make funded, then look at the time. Is for the duration of the funding capital committed, is that the same you have the funding for? And if that is okay, then look at the type, is the range of activities we need to do permitted use in the funding? Is it too restricted, or is that okay for us to use? And if the answers to all 3 questions are yes, then you're golden, fantastic. If the answer is anything less than that, so if the answer is no, then by all means, you need to have that conversation with your colleagues and maybe do something about it. Good. I hope that helped. I can see a few questions. No questions in Q&A yet, so I assume we are good. And I am moving on. The funding is, of course, just one area, and there is always a really interesting analysis that my colleagues and I have done. We looked at the agility of NGOs and then their increase in funding. And rather unsurprising, we found out that those who are very agile, who are very digital, they also increase their funding year on year. They also change their funding mix year on year quite considerably. In other words, the more flexible, the more agile they are, the more successful they tend to be. That doesn't really surprise us, but it warrants a look as to why. And if we look at the disruption that I've mentioned earlier, then the bottom line is that we just need organizations capable of responding faster, learning better, removing these bottlenecks, and be able to adapt to the new normals more frequently. The idea that after COVID everything will be fine is ridiculous. there is no post-COVID world, there's only a with-COVID world. And if it's not COVID, it's going to be the next disaster. It's going to be the next disruption. So we need to have an organization that can reprogram itself more frequently without throwing everything that we've built into question all the time. And surprisingly or not surprisingly, there are actually a whole bunch of literature and some experience we've been that you can look at. I'm trying to summarize them here. My colleagues and I have been sort of leading agile transformations for 10 years right now. So we looked back at the earliest one from 2011 we've done and see how they fared. And it looked pretty encouraging, actually, and certainly gave us the confidence that this is something that the sector needs. So I'm hoping to share a few parts of Agile running with you right now. So first of all, I want to really address the elephant in the room that is often isn't, agile and agility is that's just some management mumbo jumbo. And I get it. I thought so too, frankly. And partially it is, actually. But a little bit of mumbo jumbo goes a long way in answering some pretty important but seemingly never urgent or obvious questions. And ultimately, how we organize ourselves is about how we respond and how we scale. And given the amount of problems we have, given the amount of challenges we have in this world, and how much our beneficiaries, our ultimate customers really need us, that ability, how we respond and how we scale, is nothing academic or something to philosophize about. It is really important to be very conscious how we organize ourselves, how we work, because it either opens or closes strategic opportunities. And in an age that is so disrupted as ours, we just need to open more. So hopefully, I don't want to dive in too much. If there's a question on this one, we can, of course, happily geek out on this. But the important part is that agility, not size, is now the absolute key competitive factor. It's not the big boats, it's basically the small ones. And I've talked so much about agility now, and I'm sometimes assuming that people know what I mean. But questions on the last webinar and the last workshop we've done actually showed me that is not commonly understood. So a quick look at what it actually means. What is it? Well, an agile strategy is fundamentally different from a predictive strategy. It sets targets and then doesn't describe ways to achieve them. It is consciously giving management very little to no guidance on how to do it, leaving them to be flexible. It is obsessed with data, however. It is obsessed with learning, maybe a little bit too much sometimes, but it collects a lot of data, it measures a lot of operational key metrics, it reports them, it learns from them, and then basically the idea is to turn hindsight into foresight by learning. It usually is a platform-based organization, so that you can form rapid new partnerships and project development capacities, sometimes as quick as overnight. So there's a fair degree of digitalization, but digitalization not by an end to means, or not to reduce some costs, but really as a primary motivation to be able to project mission impact across this entire planet within 24 hours, for example. And it is an extremely trust-based organization. The teams sort of come together when and where they need it. There are far less formal structures, very flat hierarchies, and completely open data. That last point is really important because that open data plays to a lot of accountability, particularly by people who don't like to be questioned, maybe sometimes. So governance members, board members, donors themselves. And I could tell you a lot of stories about that last point, but this trust-based organization is absolutely essential. I can tell you from my own transformation of MZN back in 2018, when we went to a completely digital and no office policy. It's ultimately the trust in the team that makes a huge difference. And clearly it worked out. Some organizations need a bit longer to get there. Hopefully that gives you an impression about agile management. If not, again, we can talk about it in about 5 minutes. Right. So here's some sort of lessons from agile transformations we've seen over the last 10 years. And I'll zoom them up. Here we are. Most important is actually the first part. Most of our structures and how we are organized are sort of built on history. This is how we've always done things. And that's not actually good. You know, the structures and the systems must support the strategy. So when there is a new strategy every few years, or whether it's a substantially amended strategy, some boards and some leaders do not actually ask themselves the question if their organization still fits that strategy. And that is ridiculous if you think about it. So the structures and the systems we use must actually support the strategy and not despite them. Trust, then again, it requires a huge amount of transparency. And that requires basically some courage. The objective, the indicators, the other data points should be freely available to inspire trust. We had an organization about half a year ago where it took some convincing, but ultimately the leadership board and the governance made available their own personal development objectives as well publicly within the organization, that is. And that has inspired a lot of trust, because people said, okay, I can see my CEO is working on improving his personal skill here and there. That is actually something that he really needs to do. So I feel like I can trust my leadership more. Having that amount of open data fosters trust, fosters authenticity, and it becomes a really cultural change. Bear in mind the old saying that culture eats strategy for breakfast, and that culture follows structure. So by the time those two things are certainly true in my experience, albeit limited, of course, but opening up that amount of transparency usually triggers a culture change within the organization. The funding must be robust. I don't want to talk too much more about that. We might talk about it more in the questions. Data, absolutely important. We really want to take hindsight into insight, into foresight. That's sort of the route we want to take. So we're absolutely obsessed, and you can geek out about analysis and learning. Most of that investment is well spent. And then finally, I would really encourage that what makes an agile transformation really work is if work actually works for the people. So COVID has thrown a particular light on this one, but even before COVID, we've had this flexibility needed to allow people to work when and where needed. And from my own experience, I can certainly attest to the fact that when you give people the trust to work where and when they need it, they usually feel far more responsible for their work. And I have yet to see the colleague member who mistrusts or who abuses our unlimited paid holiday policy. It never happens. I'm really yet to see that. So the question is, why control that? There are some interesting quotes here on the right. For example, with Warchild Holland, they really put data at its core in 2020 and immediately attracted substantial donor endorsements that has yet to be translated, but it's the encouragement and the credibility they had with donors really increased as a result. Interpeace diversified its funding in 2019 and actually grew throughout 2020. That's an impressive result in the middle of the pandemic. And other organizations have had similar experiences there. Good. Last two, I think. That's a lot of information. I hope that makes any sense about robust funding. And it's not just about diversification per se, but also about how we organize ourselves. Behind all that sits a basic truth that I hope it helps you think about as well. It's a serenity prayer, effectively. There are a lot of things in this disrupted world that we just can't change. Politics, history, donor priorities, sunk costs is a big one. We've invested so much money into this and it hasn't worked. Evolving needs of beneficiary, pandemics, politics, basically. These things we can't change. And I'm not a politician, never wanted to be one. I think we shouldn't talk too much about the things we can't change, and really focus on the things we can. Because it turns out communication, organizational structure, our funding model, actually, our future costs and how we organize ourselves, that is to a greater degree than everything else within our control. So I would hopefully contribute to everyone's courage to change the things that they can and just accept the things we can't. Good. That is me done. I hope that helped. A couple of notifications from my colleagues asking to share. Yeah, I'm pretty much on time as well. That's good. There's my email address and that of my colleague Sarah. If you got any questions, if you want to get the slides as a PDF or as a PowerPoint or whichever format you like, reach out. We'll send them to you. We do not copyright our material. We hope that you find it useful and feel free to forward it to whoever you like. Day after tomorrow is a webinar by my colleagues about proposal writing, so much more pragmatic than this more conceptual webinar about the 10 questions that every proposal should answer. You can sign up for that via our website under events. Then on the 7th of October, we talk about how to turn things around when things go wrong, so how to save an NGO, basically. And then in the inside blog on MZN, you'll find a lot of hopefully help and guidance about mergers, agile NGOs, leadership, and funding that will hopefully help you make your organization stronger and stronger. That's me pretty much done. I'm going to open everybody up to talk right now. I've got a couple of questions and comments in the Q&A. If you have any other questions, then please, by all means, feel free to write it into the Q&A. I'm gonna, I only got one in the Q&A, that's easy. Urbanus is asking, Urbanus Mulobi, I hope I pronounced that correctly. What's your advice for starting NGO and getting the funds the most efficient way, keeping in mind it's a new NGO trying to start? Yeah, it's a really good question. First of all, I think if you're a new NGO or a new organization, you can avoid the mistakes of the big one, i.e., if you invest all your costs into physical infrastructure or sort of employee guides and internal red tape, just do away with all that. You can build a new organization that is automatically more agile. As a result of it, you can pretty much beat any other established NGO on cost because you'll probably be okay with a 5 to 10% overhead. That's a huge competitive advantage, but the key awareness is your innovation. What can you do? What can you offer to donors that very little else can do? Do you have an idea that is absolutely unique? Do you have a capacity that is hard to replicate? And if you do, then that needs to be up in front in your proposal. I think that's the best possible answer I can give you. Okay, that is the, oops, sorry, I've got a few more people I haven't been allowed to talk. Apologies. I have given everyone now the permission to talk. Feel free to unmute your microphone, raise your hand, or whatever it is you would like to do. And then we'll discuss it. We've got about 10 minutes left. If not, Ferial Domingo, I think you just raised your hand, is that correct? No, I don't think so then. Christine.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes, hi. I'm just interested in learning a bit more. You mentioned about a platform for rapid new partnerships and project development capacity, because often we have opportunities aligning program development and everything being lined up with opportunities that we might have for funding. Sometimes the timing of things and partnerships opportunities might come up, but we might not have our programs developed to the point yet. So just a bit more about what you mean about that rapid response.
Yeah, of course. Christine, can I just ask you where you're based, in which organization you
yes,
were?
Build It International, and we are mainly based in Zambia. That's where we do most of our work, and we also have a small office in the UK.
Perfect. Sorry, mainly where? I missed that.
Zambia.
Zambia. Okay.
We work in Zambia. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, of course, Christine. Thank you so much for asking. I think based again on the sort of experience from the last 10 years or so, let's take a completely digital project management tool where expenses are reported digitally, where the donor budget is password protected, encrypted, safe, therefore, but online available state. And then so are the milestones in the project plans. That infrastructure alone will allow you to onboard a partner who has a critical ability much more easily than having to have everything at a physical office, be it in Zambia or elsewhere. So for example, I used to be the interim finance director for Save the Children in South Sudan. Everything was very physical, albeit that was pre-2011. So things have been more manual then, analog then. And onboarding a new implementation partner anywhere in South Sudan required physical workshops in Juba, sometimes even in London. And it was a big investment of time and money. Today, if you look at other organizations that are, for example, Human Dynamics or JSI, or from our own experience, MZN, or so many of our clients, for example, they have been very intentional about making all project management, all financial management, all HR duties completely digital. And as a result, they can provide training and that can provide a sort of digital platform on which their projects are being done. Their reporting, their finances, their compliance, their everything. And this is no longer difficult. Technologically, this is possible with 3 or 4 tools, depending on what you need. But doing so is more of a culture shift. And it allows you to onboard a new partner to deliver. I had one client, for example, who did drone flying and drone mapping capacity. And they've onboarded that partner and saying, just do what you do and upload your activities and your expenses to this. And then we'll sort of talk about it over Zoom and we'll figure it out. That would have been impossible even 5 years ago. Do you see what I mean, Christine? Does this make any sense?
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is the more you simplify your internal operations and the more you digitalize them, the more open they become. The easier it is to take on new partners. If you're pretty good at it, at some point, you can then onboard new partners within 10 to 14 days, whereas now it might take you a month or so. Same thing with due diligence.
Got it.
Cool. Christine, if I didn't answer your question, hold me accountable to it. I'll happily give it another shot. Not that I'm the authority on everything agile. Saidu Amos, you've asked a question saying you are the executive director at Center of Rural Improvement Services in Ghana, a beautiful country. Thank you for joining us here. We've made efforts to meet with Sarah, but you felt okay. I'll let her know. And Joe McMartin, you've commented that NGOs are typically quite hierarchical with a board of trustees, management, and reporting to donors. How do you create an agile environment in that context? Joe, that's a fantastic question. I'd love for you to I'm not sure whether you want to tell us where you work, actually, if in case it is self-reflectory. Do you want to unmute and context that out a little bit, or shall I just go ahead?
No, I'm happy to. Thanks, Chris. Very, very interesting discussion and very, very helpful. So I have the good fortune of working freelance, just setting up recently, but for the last probably throughout my 20 years or so, 20, 30 years working on these issues, I've been really interested about how to bring in the agile thinking that's come out of IT. So it's really interesting. Your very practical approach and how you do it. But what I've found in organizations is that because they're built out of their history, as you say, they tend to be structured in times gone by and have very strong systems of historical accountability, but that don't create much agility, but because there are all these different layers of management. And so at the level of project management, you can create agility, but actually trying to help organizations work with their boards, for instance, more agilely, that seems to me quite challenging. So I'm just interested, because you're so practical, how you're going about it, how you see that, or is that one of those issues that you just say it cannot be changed, I accept it, I'm going to work where I can?
Well, that's a really good question, Joe. If I may say, Joe, sorry, there's obviously no sort of one silver bullet, one size fits all question. I'll give you probably a negative and a positive experience. Would that help?
Sure.
Yeah. So the negative one, which I continuously don't get, is this whole idea of funding diversification. The fact is that many NGOs have scaled on a dominant form of funding, be that unrestricted, like Feeding America, a huge NGO has mostly unrestricted funding, or be that a very restricted funding, like Save the Children, UK, for example, my former alma mater, and they have been very successful in raising UK funding. And then there is this whole, it comes up every board meeting, like, oh, we need to diversify, we are overly dependent on one thing, and it never corrals any action. I'm not sure if you made any different experience. In my experience, it has never led to a fundamental, bold investment and a strategic new things. And that is, I think, also the experience in the private sector. If we look at, my hometown, Volkswagen, 40% of the funding of their income goes on one car model, the Golf. And they've done this since the 40s, frankly. Why would they change that? This funding diversification that happens in those board meetings as well, and it just never happens. So I think we're sometimes barking up the wrong tree. In this case, funding diversification, in an attempt to make us more agile. And then, of course, the motivation to do something about it just doesn't come, or it is being plastered over with a let's just commission the report and file it. What I'm talking about. These sort of things happen all the time as well, unfortunately. On the positive side, we're working with an organization at the moment that is extremely built for US donor compliance, siloed structure. Hopefully you probably know what I mean. They know exactly, they're built basically to be a supplier for the US donor community. And the argument that was made that really worked there in the board meeting was, do you want to do this? Do you want to be this forever? And if so, fine, then we just need to optimize. We don't need to go agile. If you do feel like this doesn't fundamentally advance your mission, then we need to change. And I can't tell you where to change, but you certainly need to become more agile. And that has led to a sort of fundamental look at things, including a cost-cutting exercise that has been pretty radical without there being financial distress. So I think it's just basically my experience, the way we ask. Most management consultants or consultants to the NGO sector keep on and on and on about funding, and it just, that is not necessarily the answer. That's what I'm saying. We need to robust this. Hopefully, I sort of at least somewhat answered your sort of point, Joe.
Yeah, very good, very good. Thanks, yeah. Chris.
Basically, the tree we bark up. Excellent. I can see a few questions asking for proposal writing support. Saidu and Ernest, I'm going to forward that to my colleagues from the funding support team that does nothing else but help our organizations write proposals. And I'll get back to you on that side rather than discussing this here. Excellent. Are there any other questions, ideas, thoughts that we need to discuss today? I take that as a no, in which case I'm going to show my email address again. This is my email address. Thank you so much for signing in. I see some familiar faces here as well. It's really a pleasure to see you again. I hope that we can meet in person one day soon. The 2 webinars next week might be of interest to you. And if you would like to discuss this anymore, if you would like to dive in deeper into anything, then by all means, reach out. We're here for you. MZN is a non-profit as well for non-profits. We just like to build the strongest NGOs that possibly are for this, for the 8 years we have left until the SDGs, because frankly, you really need to be strong in this day and age. Thank you so much for spending your valuable time with me. I really, really appreciate it. I wish you all the health and all the happiness wherever you're from, and hopefully see you again very soon online, or better even offline over a coffee or beer, depending on the time of day. Thanks, everybody. Bye.